One of the most dangerous things an ambitious person can do is repeatedly seek guidance from people who have never psychologically, financially, spiritually, or creatively gone where they are trying to go. That sounds harsh at first, but sit with it carefully. Human beings do not only give advice from intelligence. They give advice from identity, from emotional tolerance, from what feels safe to them internally, which means most advice is not actually objective. It is autobiographical. A person who abandoned their own vision 20 years ago will unconsciously try to make your ambition sound unrealistic. Not because they hate you, but because your courage reopens the part of them that settled. That is why average environments often punish uncommon vision before they reward it. And if you are not mentally disciplined, you will slowly begin adjusting your life around the emotional comfort of people who were never assigned to your trajectory in the first place. There is an African proverb that says, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth." Read that deeply. Human beings have a psychological need to belong, to feel accepted, to feel emotionally safe within the group. This is why so many intelligent people betray themselves quietly. Not because they lack capability, not because they lack ideas, but because they fear social exile more than unrealized potential. So they downplay themselves, they soften their vision, they speak cautiously about their goals, they stop moving with conviction, and eventually they become psychologically split. Externally present, internally disconnected. This is what happens when approval becomes more important than alignment. As I wrote in the Flint Mind, conformity is the surrender of intellect. Not because community is bad, not because listening is weakness, but because the moment your thinking becomes entirely dependent on mass agreement, your original mind starts collapsing inward. You stop thinking from possibility, you start thinking from permission. And permission-based living destroys execution. I remember speaking to somebody years ago who wanted to launch a business. Sharp mind, clear vision, very capable, but every time he got close to starting, he would run the idea through 5 or 6 people first. Friends, family, people online, people at work, and almost every response was cautious. Are you sure? What if it doesn't work? The market is saturated. You should wait. You should stay stable first. Now notice something. None of these people had ever built anything remotely close to what he wanted to create. But because there were multiple voices saying the same thing, he mistook repetition for truth. That is one of the greatest psychological traps in existence. Consensus creates emotional certainty, even when the consensus itself is built on fear. Years passed. The idea never materialized. Not because he lacked intelligence, because he outsourced conviction. That is what happens when your internal compass becomes dependent on external comfort. Now compare that to another example. There was a woman I spoke to who wanted to completely reinvent her life creatively after years inside a career that looked stable from the outside but was quietly destroying her mentally. Everybody around her advised caution. Keep the salary, stay safe, do not risk embarrassment, do not throw your life away. But she understood something most people never do. A stable life that disconnects you from yourself is not stability, it is slow psychological erosion. So she moved carefully, not recklessly. Carefully, she studied, built skills, created structure, took strategic risks, and over time her entire identity changed. Not just her finances, her nervous system, her posture changed, her confidence changed, her energy changed. Because when people begin living in alignment with their deeper vision, the body often responds before the results even fully arrive. This is why protecting your internal world matters so much. Your mind is programmable. The people around you affect what you normalize, what you believe is possible, what level of action feels acceptable, and even what level of success your nervous system can emotionally tolerate. Most people do not realize this. They think influence only happens through direct instruction. No, influence happens through repeated exposure. Repeated exposure to fearful thinking eventually makes courage feel irrational. Repeated exposure to mediocrity eventually makes excellence feel excessive. Repeated exposure to limitation eventually makes expansion feel dangerous. This is why certain environments quietly weaken people. Not physically, mentally. You begin second-guessing your instincts, over-explaining your vision, seeking emotional permission before action, and this creates hesitation. The Flint Mind speaks about this deeply, because hesitation is rarely just laziness. Most hesitation is internal conflict. Part of you sees the future. Another part of you fears the social consequences of becoming it. That tension destroys momentum, and if not interrupted, years disappear. That is why discernment matters more than motivation. You do not need endless encouragement. You need accurate voices around you. People whose lives carry evidence. People who understand sacrifice. People who understand delayed gratification. People who understand pressure without collapsing into fear every time uncertainty appears. Because uncertainty is not always danger. Sometimes uncertainty is simply the psychological price of expansion. And ambitious people must learn the difference. The crowd usually interprets uncertainty emotionally. Builders interpret uncertainty strategically. That is a completely different mindset. The average person sees risk and thinks, protect yourself. The visionary sees risk and thinks, what becomes possible if this works? That shift alone changes entire destinies. And let me say this clearly, this is not about arrogance. You should absolutely listen, absolutely learn, absolutely remain teachable. But wisdom without evidence should never outweigh conviction, supported by preparation, discipline, and deep thought. Some people are deeply opinionated, despite having no real relationship with execution. You must recognize that. A person can sound wise and still be psychologically trapped. A person can sound rational while living entirely from fear. A person can sound balanced while quietly dying inside because they abandoned themselves years ago. You have to develop the intelligence to hear the difference. That is maturity. As I wrote in the Flint Mind, your journey is unique. Your metrics are internal. That line matters because comparison and consensus destroy originality. And originality is expensive. It often costs comfort first before it pays freedom later. Most people never reach their real potential because they keep negotiating with environments that were never designed for expansion. The transformation begins when you stop asking, will everybody understand my vision? And start asking, do I understand it deeply enough to endure misunderstanding while building it? That is a completely different level of psychological strength. That is where execution stabilizes. That is where self-trust deepens. That is where your identity stops bending every time public opinion changes direction. And eventually you become calmer, not louder, clearer. You stop needing applause to move. You stop panicking when people doubt you. You stop collapsing every time results take time. Because your conviction is no longer built on temporary validation. It is built on internal truth. That is the Flint Mind. Not blind confidence, not delusion, not ego. Disciplined belief, strategic thinking, psychological resilience, original thought under pressure. And once you begin thinking this way, your life changes because you stop building yourself around public comfort and start building yourself around your actual potential.